All right, got one easy camera I can check on my way through to my destination on this wicked trail. Interesting. Anyway, let's see what's on the camera. All right, so quick mention, on my way here, back to the boat, which is absolutely peeing rain, I was going to stop and go up to this mountain, side of this mountain, to this perch I spotted a little while ago. And get some shares made there, and who knows, maybe get a rock thrown at me, but whatever. I went to another place, it's raining. Thought, oh, well, maybe I'll go check one of my trail cameras, because I could almost drive to it in this old road, logging road, so I went and grabbed it. And it's one of the Guard Pro trail cameras, the original one that I bought, and what made me so impressed with them. So I'm going to put all the clips that I found on that camera today, I'm going to put them right here, and you guys can look at them first, all right? And then we'll get into sharing the late, great Bobby Short's entries in her book, which I'm going to do here in a second. But take a look at these frickin' clips in this trail camera. Like, you can't argue. Well, you could argue, but I mean, what more do you need out of a frickin' trail cam? These things are wicked. Kind of fun to see the bear doing his little back scratch in that tree, too, right? But anyway, check them out. Interesting. All right, hold on a minute. I just noticed something. Now I'm going to post up these two nighttime clips, and you tell me what you see. All right? I don't know what it is, but I just noticed it myself. So take a look at it, and then we'll get into sharing the encounters. Okay, here we go. I'm on the boat, and it is absolutely peeing rain out there. I don't know if you can hear it in the background sound or not. I'll stay quiet for a second. Yep, it sounds like static on the radio. Now, anyway, I have got the late, great Bobby Short's book with me, and I'm going to sit here and read a few pages out of it. Now listen to this. This is titled Mainland Halkomelem, Upper Stallow. The Halkomelem speaking people of the Lower Fraser Valley in British Columbia, Canada, sometimes call themselves collectively Stallow, bracket, river, and bracket, people. Author Wilson Duff used the term Upper Stallow for the people from Chilliwack upstream with whom he worked in 1949 and 1950. He gives informants descriptions and accounts as like two man-like creatures. Duff recorded the Sasquatch native term as Sasquatch and the cannibal woman terminology as Wuxia. No pronunciation given. Cite William Duff, The Upper Stalo Indians of the Fraser Valley, British Columbia, 1952, Sasquatches. Duff reports are usually seen singly. They are described as men, covered with dark hair, more than 8 feet tall, who leave footprints about 20 inches long. Duff cites 2 experiences with the Sasquatch. And this next entry is titled, The Stolen Women Learned the Language. In this first account, a typical older account given by Adeline Lorenzetto of Oha Mill Indian Reservation in British Columbia said the Sasquatches caused a person it touched to become unconscious. So great was her fear, they stole women and kept them as wives, producing many half-Indian, half-Sasquatch children. Some were haired, some not. They stole food from people for the women and their children. They have a language, which the stolen woman learned. When a woman escaped and re-entered human society, she became unconscious again because, quote, because she had been with the Sasquatches and wasn't like a person anymore, end quote. The captive wife woman forgot her native language, and hair began to grow all over her body. But Indian doctors worked on her and she became normal again. Many years later, the Sasquatches returned, but she could no longer communicate with them. The woman asked the hunters not to shoot them because they might be her relatives. Wilson Duff, 1952. In the second account, cited by Duff, the Sasquatch murdered a group of women from the Oha Mill Indian Reservation but left their children unhurt. In recent accounts, Duff said, a person who usually sees the Sasquatch on moonlit night should run from the Sasquatch. He will be followed but not overtaken. In another case given, the man escaped by shooting the Sasquatch dead. Interesting. The Kwakiutl Indians in British Columbia also believed that there were giants in the forest that ate Indian women who strayed too far into the forest. No wonder the haired giants were greatly feared. In another account, which is a brief version of the famous Ruby Creek incident, the Sasquatch breaks into a house to steal dried fish. S.C. Tifting described what he and police officer Joe Dunn discovered about the 1941 Ruby Creek incident. The Sasquatch had merely stepped over a 4-foot-high Canadian Pacific Railroad fence and continued on over the railroad and into the mountain on the other side. Jeannie Chapman and her children were terrified when the daughter, little Rosie, reported that a, quote, big cow, end quote, was coming out of the forest. Mrs. Chapman saw the Sasquatch herself. It was 8 to 10 feet tall, hairy creature with a human face. The Sasquatch broke into a heavy barrel of smoked salmon and threw some about. When Dunn and Tifting arrived, they were able to follow the tracks of the Sasquatch from the cabin to the creek, where it must have washed off some of the salt from its mouth. It then went back through the garden, crossed the Canadian Pacific Railroad fence by easily stepping over it. Let's flip the pages here. Then went across the railroad tracks and straight up the mountain, where, of course, Tifting and Dunn could no longer follow. This thing must have been huge. Dunn was flabbergasted by its footprint. It was narrow at the heel and wide at the toes. He traced it. Certain that it showed 5 toes, S.A. Tifting would say 5 toes as well. Stealing fish is mentioned in a number of accounts by coastal Indians ranging from Alaska to California. Quote, the cannibal woman, Uxia, was described as a short, stout woman who caught children, gummed their eyes shut with tree pitch, carried them off in a basket, cooked them, and ate them. She lived in a cave above Yale, British Columbia, which was blasted away when the railroad was built, and the white people may have captured her. At any rate, a picture appeared in the paper that looked like her. Uxia. That was reported by William Duff, citing Wilson Duff, The Upper Stalo Indians of the Fraser Valley, British Columbia, 1952. Interesting, right? The Tanania, the Atna, and the Ingalik. To the Tanania Indians in the vicinity to the north and south of Wasilla, Alaska, the raven is a type of creator god, not only to them, but to include other Alaskan Athabascans. The raven is revered and benevolent figure that helps shape their world. At the same time, the raven is a trickster character in many Tanania stories that tell of the trouble the raven can get into. The term Quaxtaskidi, however, describes in their original language a malevolent entity that is hair-covered, tall, and hides in the bush where it makes strange sounds. The Quaxtaskidi is the Watcher. That was another entry. So, quick mention. Excuse me. When the mention of the Ruby Creek incident with that large 10-foot tall dude that came across the back 40, that story's been out forever. Well, and the human-like face, and the stolen women, and the half Sasquatch, half native women mentions. Excuse me, while a truck driver in British Columbia was driving along the Fraser River, almost directly across the river from that area, and he saw two of them in the ditch on a rainy night in the winter, middle of the night, in his headlights, and he said one was absolutely huge and ugly, and he said the other one looked like a good-looking blonde-ish female. He said it looked more like a good-looking human female with blonde hair. I remember reading that account a while back. So I'd share that. Pine Ridge, Oglala Sioux. Among those reporting encounters with the Quiet Ones are the Oglala Sioux of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. The reservation encompasses the entirety of Shannon County, the southern half of Jackson County, and the northwest portion of Bennett County, an area larger than the states of Delaware and Rhode Island combined. Much has been written about the existence of the Quiet Man in the Grassy Plains region. We would have no knowledge of it without the helpful cooperation of the indigenous people who live alongside the Bigfoot on those prairie reserves. On August 1st of 2006, it was widely reported that a hairy man had been shot to death near Slim Butte, and the body was being studied somewhere on campus at South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, an engineering and science university in Rapid City, South Dakota. It may be that the editor published this report on April Fool's Day to absolve himself of any ridicule the incident might bring. Skeptical editors can be thin-skinned. Of serious note, the report stated the body was supposedly seen and given a smudging ceremony by 3 Lakota elders, including Wilmer Mesteth and Oliver Red Cloud. Mesteth loudly exclaimed by phone that it was a bunch of baloney. But was it baloney? On August 17th, 2006, the tribe's chief of police, Twiss, wrote this report in part. Oh, this ought to be good. My name is James Twiss, Twiss. I'm a police officer on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and I am passing on information regarding the rashest sightings of the tall man or Bigfoot on the Pine Ridge Reservation. During one of these sightings, I had our department's thermal imaging camera, and, along with about 6 other officers, did in fact pick up a large heat signature on the camera. Excuse me. Unfortunately, we don't have a recorder yet for the camera, so we weren't able to record it. We did watch as it moved away from us down a gully, and it was missed by the other officers as they tried to find it using their flashlights. It's hard to explain, as it must have already been past the officers before they arrived on the scene. We watched it go into the creek area which runs through town. We heard a flurry of dogs barking, but weren't able to locate it. Also, to set the record straight, the first 2 sightings that were called in reported a tall man, 10 to 15 feet tall, who appeared to be wearing a stovepipe hat and a long coat. He was reported to be peeking into an apartment complex, commons room, where there were several witnesses. This is strange, as in the early 1980s, my brother was a police officer and responded to a call with another officer in the county 35 miles northeast of Pine Ridge. And when they arrived, the family was in the living room with their dogs, and had turned their furniture into a fort in the living room and was armed with knives and whatever else they could find. They advised that they had heard their dogs running into their front door, and when they opened it, the dogs ran in and were scared. The family reported seeing a large man. His hips were above the roof of their family car, wearing a stovepipe hat and had a long coat. My brother and the other officers went outside where the man was reported to be and saw that the light layer of ice was broken, and the mud was disturbed where something had moved towards the creek area. The family had the officers wait while they got together their belongings and had the officers escort them from the residence. This isn't the only sighting we have here. The sightings increase every spring and fall. Oh, that's interesting. The stovepipe hat, well, who knows, right? Who knows what made them see that, think they saw it, or did they see it? I don't know. Two-time National Book Award-winning American novelist and non-fiction writer Peter Matheson, in his 1980 edition of, quote, "In the Spirit of Crazy Horse," end quote, quoted many stories from the Oglala Sioux people. The Lakota Western Sioux called the Bigfoot Chia Tonka. Chia means old elder brother, and Tonka means great or big. Modern Siouans simply use the term big man. C.V. Tench, a prolific 1960s pulp writer for Alcoa, presents, quote, "One Step Beyond," end quote, published Hoodoo Gold in British Columbia. Death Guards Lost Creek Mine in 1939. The Slumach, of course, was an elderly white man who once lived with the Katzie Indian settlement at the mouth of Pitt Lake, a regional home to a large number of Sasquatch in British Columbia. Yeah, it is, especially still today, the head of Pitt Lake up the Pitt River, big time. And that river actually goes up to the headwaters, where just over the ridge is where I film those lights and have had encounters myself. Side note, the Slumach claimed to have discovered the legendary Pitt Lake gold deposit at the Lost Creek Mine with the aid of the Sasquatch people. If true, that must have been an amazing occurrence. The old Katzie village has been moved to the opposite side of the lake and now lies closer to the northernmost bank of the Fraser River, not too distant from Langley. A region is rife with stories of the Sasquatch and sightings and other interactions with their kind that continue today. Author Tench, deeply interested in the Sasquatch, interviewed J.W. Burns, and their exchange is recorded for all time, whereas the rumored interview John Green claimed to have with Burns has yet to be made public, if indeed it ever took place. A vain and often jealous man in his later years, Green's propensity for demeaning and discrediting the work of others in research is not unknown, including any work Burns did, especially his documentation of the Saraphene Long story. Weird, eh? So what? So those guys are like the original gangsters of cannibalism with the Sasquatch community, maybe? Whatever. Burns, a highly respected Canadian government-paid Indian agent, published a most extensive compilation of early Chehalis First Nation reports derived from the region surrounding and including British Columbia's Morris Mountain. His recordings were uniquely personal between him and his students who lived on the reservation. Beyond acknowledging Burns' use of the term Sasquatch, there was additional terminology attributed to him. He was the first to author the word Saskahua, an early term he learned from his charges on the Chehalis Indian Reserve located 60 miles from the city of Vancouver, British Columbia. While Saskahua is a lesser-known term for that term than Sasquatch, I placed its importance in how it translates, place of the wild men. The Indians of the Saskahua district called the hair giants Saskahua Sweque. Sweque? S-W-E-Q-E. The giants, it was said, spoke in the Douglas dialect. That'll be the Douglas natives. To that end, Burns penned these words, quote, "Indian legends tell of two tribes of Sasquatches who dwelt in this section of the country. They were deadly enemies and practically exterminated one another. fighting hand-to-hand with war clubs on the mountainsides. Skeptics may laugh at the idea of primitive man in the shape of 8-foot giants still living in British Columbia. Nevertheless, I have collected a good deal of evidence tending to prove the Sasquatch may not be extinct, end quote. How right was he? Excuse me, and on that note, way back, a handful of years back, oh my God, I can actually say way back, and how long have I been doing this? But a guy got a hold of me one time. Did get a hold of me. Would he email me? Or was it a comment on the comment section? But either way, I vividly remember this guy's statement. And he lived in Bamfield, which is where I am right now. And he said that he was out in the woods poaching cedar, which is big dollars, right? So that means these guys go out to secluded places, which he did say. And he said he went to the end of this deactivated logging road, blah, blah, blah. He said he went up to where he'd cut down a huge cedar tree. And he said here was this 10 to 12 foot tall, hairy giant with a club in its hand, standing there in the logged-off area staring at him. And I believe he said that he immediately left and he never returned, and he doesn't live here anymore. But I'll never forget that one. And that's very near where I take you guys quite often around here when I film in the woods around here. And that river that you saw Sarah and the dog where she got bit by the mud wasps. Anyway, carrying on. Back to Bobby. The importance of that paragraph and its detail should not be lost on those in serious research. There may have been others who recorded stories of the haired men in that region, but none so well published as Burns, who, better to know the relationship between the First Nation people and the Sasquatch than a man who lived among them and was trusted by the Chehalis. That Burns' revelations were published probably shocked the straight-laced readers of that era. Unknowingly, Burns had clearly helped mold the foundation for hominid understanding about the Sasquatch, and for that we should all be grateful. Despite John Green's attempts to minimize Burns' enormous contributions to Sasquatch research, Burns' great contributions should be acknowledged. Burns, for his part, actually conducted the interviews with the Chehalis he lived among in that day. Conversely, newspaperman Green only served to paraphrase the work Burns had already done. Burns was a resident of the Chehalis soil. Green was not. Who better to know the relationship the Chehalis had with the Sasquatch than John Burns? Burns' written assemblage cornered the market on what was known at the time and since regarding the abduction of Indian maidens and other behaviors unique to the Sasquatch. Above and beyond the determination of Sasquatch DNA, if he hadn't lived among the Chehalis and if he hadn't chronicled the traditions and the stories of that time, we would know virtually nothing of Sasquatch behavior in that region. My admiration for Burns' work is noticeable. John Green, on the other hand, went to great lengths to dismiss Burns' contribution, but in truth, the same can be said of Green's 4,000-count database. His card index collection, a copy in my possession since 2002, shows most of those reports were sent to him by other field persons, and some of those entries showed no sign that Green ever investigated all that he counted. So exactly how much of the data attributed to, and in Green's numbers, should be minimized. By my count, I would toss out 40% of Green's index cards where just a couple of second or third-hand sentences are written, lending them unworthy to be counted in the end tally of 4,000, which makes up Green's database. Some of those contributing field investigators in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, hold on, flip the page, had so much as a conversation with Green, yet the details of their data became gospel once in Green's possession. Suffice it to say that Green did not investigate or have personal contact with all the informants listed on these typed and handwritten index cards. There's also no indication in the files that the contributing field persons who sent Green these reports ever investigated the accounts before they were sent off to Green. In fairness, the negative criticism Green launched on Burns can be said of Green, and that was my point, which I intentionally overstated. Mr. Burns recounted a number of well-authenticated stories of encounters with the early wild men who carefully avoided contact with civilization. White men of the day generally thought that the wild men are extinct. The Chehalis knew otherwise. Perhaps the strangest and most terrifying experience any Indian woman ever had with the Sasquatch was one related by a Chehalis woman named Saraphene Long. At the time Burns interviewed her, Saraphene was very old. She claimed that when she was a young girl, she was kidnapped by a giant Sasquatch and taken to the abode of the hairy monsters for nearly a year. She told Burns that story many times over. He set down her words as accurately as possible. Well, here we go. Entry title, What Happened to Saraphene Long? Here is some of what John Burns wrote. Quote, I should explain that among the natives of Canada, both Indians and Eskimos, there is a shortage of marriageable women. Probably a similar condition exists among the Sasquatch, thus explaining the action of the wild giant in this case. I should also like to add that although her present-day photograph hardly bears this out, the evidence of her contemporaries goes to show that in her girlhood, Saraphene Long was considered one of the most beautiful girls in her tribe. And here is her story. Quote, I was walking toward home one day many years ago carrying a big bundle of cedar roots and thinking of the young brave Qualak Thunderbolt. Carrying the cedar roots and thinking of the young brave Qualak Thunderbolt. First name spelled Qualac. I was soon to marry. Suddenly at a place where the brush grew close and thick beside the trail, a long arm shot out and a big hairy hand was pressed over my mouth. Then I was suddenly lifted up into the arms of a young Sasquatch. I was terrified. I fought and struggled with all my might. In those days I was strong, but it was no good. The wild man was as powerful as a young bear. Holding me easily under one arm, with his other hand he smeared tree gum over my eyes, sticking them shut so that I could not see where he was taking me. He then lifted me to his shoulder and started to run. He ran on and on for a long time, up and down hills, through thick brush, across many streams, never stopping to rest. Once he had to swim a river, and then perhaps I could have gotten away, but I was so terrified of being drowned that I held on tightly with my arms about his neck. Although I was frightened, I could not but admire his easy breathing, his great strength and speed of foot. After reaching the other side of the river, he began to climb and climb. Presently, the air became very cold. I could not see, but I guessed that we were close to the top of a mountain. And then the next entry is titled, Notice Caves, Language, Use of Fire, and Animal Skins. Saraphene continues. At last the Sasquatch stopped hurrying. Then he stopped. He stooped over and moved slowly as if feeling his way along a tunnel. Presently he laid me down very gently, and I heard people talking in a strange tongue I could not understand. The young giant next wiped the sticky tree gum from my eyelids, and I was able to look around me. Now, how the hell would you do that? Anybody had sap on their skin before? Could you imagine trying to get that shit off your eyelids? Sorry. I sat up and saw that I was in a great big cave. The floor was covered with animal skins, soft to touch and much better preserved than we preserve them. A small fire in the middle of the floor gave all the light there was. And as my eyes became accustomed to the gloom, I saw that beside the young giant who had brought me to the cave there were two other wild people, a man and a woman. To me, a young girl, they seemed very, very old, but they were active and friendly. And later I learned that they were the parents of the young Sasquatch who had stolen me. When they all came over to look at me, I cried and asked them to let me go. They just smiled and shook their heads. From then on, I was kept a close prisoner. Not once would they let me go out of the cave. Always one of them stayed with me when the other two were away. They fed me well on roots, fish, and meat, and after I learned a few words of their tongue, which is not unlike the Douglas dialect, I asked the young giant how he caught and killed the deer, mountain goats, and sheep that he often brought into the cave. He smiled, opening and closing his big hairy hands, and I guessed that he just laid in wait, and when the animal got close enough, he... Hold on, flipping the page. He leapt, caught it, and choked it to death. He was certainly big enough, quick enough, and strong enough to do so. All right, so for me, sheep, goats, so that means if it's BC, he's up around the Fraser River. Somewhere along the Fraser. When I had been in the cave for about a year, I began to feel very sick and weak, and I could not eat much. I told this to the young Sasquatch and pleaded with him to take me back to my own people. At first he got very angry, as did his father and mother, but I kept on pleading with them, telling them that I wished to see my own people again before I died. I really was ill, and I suppose they could see that for themselves, because one day after I cried for a long time, the Sasquatch went outside and returned with a leaf full of tree gum. With this, he stuck down my eyelids as he had done before. Then he again lifted me to his big shoulder. The return journey was like a very bad dream, for I was lightheaded and in much pain. When we recrossed the wide river, I almost felt swept away. I was too weak to cling to the young Sasquatch, but he held me with one big hand and swam with the other. Close to my home, he put me down and gently removed the tree gum from my eyelids. When he saw that I could see again, he shook his head sadly, pointed to my house, and then turned back into the forest. My people were all wildly excited when I stumbled back into the house, for they had long ago given me up as dead. But I was too sick and weak to talk. I just managed to crawl into bed, and that night I gave birth to a child. The little one lived only a few hours, for which I have always been thankful. I hope that never again shall I see a Sasquatch. Wow, no doubt. Saraphene Long's story, for what it's worth, is the only one of its kind by a First Nation woman in the last century who bore witness personally to her ordeal. This sort of thing, or any mention of sex, was not acceptable conversation in those days, and had Burns seen fit not to publish her account. And had Burns seen fit not to publish her account, we would never have known about it, or any of the other Sasquatch behaviors she mentioned, to include animal skins, fire, and what they ate. Huh. Crazy, huh? And then she just had the other entry titled Tunnels, Language, and Fire. Saraphene testified her abductor, quote, felt his way along a tunnel wall, end quote. It sounds like she was underground at that point. This could only be an answer to why we can't find the Sasquatch. They could be living underground. This, of course, has been long suspected by serious research. Well, it's quite the story, isn't it? But not too far away from where Albert Ostman was as well kidnapped. So you can't say they don't snatch the odd person, right? Still haven't read about somebody getting gobbled up or barbecued. Her testimony indicates that she, quote, heard people talking in a strange language, end quote, and indicated there was a language among the Sasquatch. Of course, if you're a proponent of the hypothesis, you would ignore these clues to Sasquatch behavior. Another very important detail in her story is the small fire that lit the room, a strong indication that the Sasquatch do use fire, at least underground. Saraphene observed the use of animal hides on the floor of the cave's main room, and she indicated the hides were better preserved than her tribe was able to. Much in the way detail is missing from her story, like whether or not they actually cooked their food or simply used fire for light and heat. Did they dry or smoke meat? How is other food prepared? What about the stench so many informants today speak of? It's rarely mentioned in any of these older first-hand accounts. It may be that the stench description is overplayed, exaggerated, beyond the real truth, but that wouldn't be true in the case of the Colville and Spokane Indian nations a bit further south from where Saraphene Long's ordeal took place. Further reference to Indian women being kidnapped by the primitive hair giants of British Columbia appeared in this newspaper article in 1934. In the article, the term boogeyman replaces Sasquatch. Article courtesy Scott McLean. Boogeyman apparently was a term used around Harrison Mills, British Columbia in 1934, and the headlines read, Boogeyman of Indian tribe appears again in Harrison Mills, BC. March 3rd, 1934. Indian children clung to their mothers' apron strings today for the terrible Sasquatch. A giant, hairy, and horrid is on the prowl again. For hundreds of years, the Sasquatch has been a fearsome boogeyman to the Northwest Indians. None had been reported for 30 years, but horror swept the lodges of the primitive Chehalis tribe today as word was whispered that the hairy one had returned. Frank Dan was first to report sighting the monster. He went out into the night to see why his dog was barking so furiously, and he came face to face with a hairy giant, tall, muscular, and nude. The Sasquatch and scores of other demons are very real to the Chehalis. They are things of horror, emerging to snatch an Indian into the unknown and to devour babies. Distributed by the Associated Press, the story was picked up and published by the Lima News, Northeastern Ohio. Scott McLean. And Bobby goes on to comment, my thought on the idea that the Sasquatch eats human babies is different. Hold on. Flipping the page. I don't think for a minute they devour children. It's more likely that they raise them up wild and use them as an addition to their gene pool. That could account for so many of the reports being of lesser size than those of giants. Maybe. Excuse me. Should I keep on going here? I gotta get to bed. I gotta get up at 4 o'clock. This next entry is like a few pages. I might have to wait a little bit. Or carry on tomorrow. Let's see. Oh, yeah. If I start reading this, it's going to be too much. So I'll leave the book open there, and I will carry on, because it goes on to talk about more kidnappings on the Colville Reservation. Interesting, isn't it? All right. There we go. There you go, you guys. At least I got something shared for tomorrow. We're supposed to have Mike on tomorrow, but no big deal. He's told Sarah he wants to reschedule to have a conversation with us and fill us in about what's going on with those beings on his ranch. It's going to be one hell of an interesting conversation once I get in there with him. Hope he's feeling better. No big deal. 2 or 3 other people we have to get back on again, and we got a whole slew of other people lined up to come on here and talk with me about their truth and what's going on and share with you guys. So there you go. I'll be back possibly tomorrow at the end of fishing. Who knows? Maybe Jeff wants to do live fish tomorrow. I don't know. I'll run it by him. We'll see what we're doing. I'll be back later. Share my story at howtohunt.com. Get your truth out, you guys. Don't be scared. See you tomorrow.